You're listening to KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas, the voice of the people, voted best radio station for music 2 years in a row by the Dallas Observer.
Did you know that KNON podcasts all of its local talk shows? KNON has local talk, each show covering your community in its own unique way. So if you missed one of our great morning talk shows, you can go back and listen to it online. We keep the shows for 2 months so you can hear everything you have been missing out on. Visit KNON.org for more information about the KNON Morning Talk Shows podcast. Also available on iTunes.
What a game! What a game! Get off my lawn.
Jim Schutze here with Get Off My Lawn, the KNON radio version of a column that I write daily, every weekday for the Dallas Observer online edition. I want to thank David Taffet for sitting in for me, doing a great job last week. I was down at Caddo Lake camping. And thank you, David, for showing up for me. I write Get Off My Lawn, as I say, every weekday on the Dallas Observer webpage. What is it? Well, it's a column like this show where I say stuff that I guess you're not supposed to say. Or I think of myself as like the cousin at Thanksgiving Day dinner. Everybody's having a good time. Everybody's getting along. Everybody's sitting there. But everybody's got one eye on Cousin Jim, because he's the one who's going to ask why his cousin Roberta had a baby when she wasn't married yet. You know, there's always that one person at the dinner who's going to say stuff like that, and I look at that as my job, or as a defective character or something. Last week I wrote an item, and I got a response that was not atypical for what I get. Let me read you some of the comments I got. MP Dallas wrote, "You're a dope and I hate you." Better Living Through Kim wrote, well, I'm not going to read you that one because that'll give away what it's about. Here's another one. Ross F. Pineda, "The writer is an idiot and has very little understanding." Okay, here's one. "Okay, Jim, but everyone knows that Dallas Observer writers are a bunch of burnout drunks and stoners." You get the flavor. Let me skip to the last one I've got here. "This is the stupidest thing I've ever read. I hate Jim Schutze." Now, the fact is that these comments, as terrible as they may sound when I just read them off to you that way, were pretty fair. I think they were appropriate. It was fair game. And let me mention before I go on with this topic that I want you to comment too. Call me up here this morning at 972-647-1893. KNON Community Radio, 972-647-1893. So what were people talking about? Why were they saying that they hated me and I was an idiot and a burnout stoner and stuff? I had written about Lance Armstrong. And the reason people said they hate me was because I said I hate Lance Armstrong. I compared Lance Armstrong to street drug dealers. I said he was a cheater. And I didn't get much argument on the cheater thing. I think we're all pretty well decided about that. But I got a huge amount of blowback on comparing him to drug dealers. As a matter of fact, I wrote that thing early in the week. I think I wrote it on Monday. And I spent the rest of the week reading about drug addiction and performance-enhancing drugs. And I have a column about this in next week's newspaper, the print product, as we call it, the Dallas Observer, the one that you find in the box. And I'm doing what we call in the newspaper business a partial skin back. Excuse me. I'm not retracting the basis of what I still hate Lance Armstrong, and I think he's a SOB and a drug dealer. But I pulled back a little on an assertion that Lance Armstrong is responsible for people selling crack on the street. There's probably not a direct connection there, and I didn't, the stuff online is a little bit shoot from the hip. The column in the newspaper, I get time to think about it and do some more reporting, and I talked to some interesting people who are experts in addiction, and I did a bunch of reading. I also link. Because I'm pulling back a little on the connection between Lance Armstrong and crack dealers, I didn't want to lose all my punch. So in the column next week, I'll explain how Lance Armstrong is connected to the Nazis, and we can get into that when that one comes out. So what was my argument in the first place about why he's connected to drug dealers? Well, I said that what he stands for is the idea that life isn't good enough without a needle in your arm, that we can do better through injection. And the commenters, who were, I've got to tell you, 90% just dumping on me, said this is how it is in this sport. That it's ridiculous to maintain that Lance Armstrong is the Lone Ranger. That this is just a sport where this is what happens. This is how people compete. I'm still going to maintain that he is. Look, I've seen the numbers there. The New York Times published this amazing chart for how many of the top racers have confessed to blood doping, and it's the majority of them. Whoever it is who runs the Tour de France announced last week that for the 7 years that Armstrong has been disqualified, there will be no winner. They're not going to name anybody else, and they acted like they thought that this is what they should do as a matter of honor. I laughed when I heard that story on the radio. The reason they can't name a winner for those 7 years is because everybody else was doing it too, and they've already confessed. So one of the big arguments against me was that somehow it's naive to single out Armstrong. Armstrong singles himself out because he's the biggest jerk about it. The other people have done this thing called confess, and he never has, and he maintains now, and it's an absurdity given the evidence against him, he still maintains that he's innocent. He also does this thing that I really hate, which is that he pulls the mantle of cancer over himself because of his foundation, because he had it. Whenever anybody accuses him, he says, wait a minute, look at the money I raised for cancer. I'm sorry to go back to the drug dealer metaphor, but that just reminds me of some cartel boss in a little town in Zacatecas saying, yeah, it's true, I had 19 of the young fellows from town executed last month, but look, I paid to restore the statue of our Blessed Virgin. You can't blame me too much for the kids I had to execute. Look at my good works. No, that's okay. That's a little overdrawn, perhaps, but I think there's a moral calculus there that doesn't work, and it's fishy. That the guy's issue is cheating, and whenever it comes up, he wants to talk about cancer. So, anyway, I wrote this thing linking him to substance abuse generally, and there's where I really caught it from readers who thought it was just utterly unfair to suggest any connection between these performance-enhancing drugs and what goes on in professional sports and substance abuse, what we think of as street drugs, recreational drugs. Let me remind you, I'm always open to comment. If you want to call in and like the commenters online and say, Jim, you're an idiot, you're a burnout stoner and a fool, I'm over 21 years old, actually. I have a thick skin. I can take this kind of stuff. Call me up at 972-647-1893. It's 972-647-1893. So what, if anything, could be said about the connection between performance-enhancing drugs and street drugs? Well, first of all, excuse me, we need to get rid of the notion that the stuff that the cyclists are accused of using is somehow natural. It's called EPO. Oh, I can't pronounce the real name of it, but it's a drug that causes you to produce more red blood cells than you would normally. And that's a huge advantage because then you can carry more oxygen. And it's also the fact that it's against the law. It's cheating to use it. So here you have the case of this guy, of these people who cheat to win by sticking this stuff in their arms. I have a hard. How can we not see a connection between that and all of the other abusive drugs that we see in our society? There's a whole lot that's been written recently about Adderall, and I don't know what to say there. The New York Times had a piece recently about Adderall, and the suggestion of the piece was that the whole country's stoned on Adderall and we're all going to die. When you read on down through the piece, they had no empirical evidence of an epidemic. They had a lot of anecdotal stuff, but there was a very glaring absence of empirical evidence that this is an epidemic. There's a problem there. I know that we in the media discover a new horrible disease that's going to kill everybody about once a month. We come up with these things. And, for example, we should all be dead from killer bees years ago, if you look back at all the killer bee stories. I bet that there are whole generations of people who are now in the workplace who don't even know what a killer bee is. Killer bees, and they had their own movie. That was an epidemic that had its own movie. And I think it was one of those things that was a real problem that sort of got turned into overblown nonsense story in the media. So I know that happens. And I suspect that some of the same stuff goes on with Adderall. And maybe with drug abuse generally. It's really, really hard to get to a realistic picture of it. Lots of kids use Adderall, lots of adults use Adderall, but out of that number of people, you've got to assume that the vast majority of them, I bet, are using it with oversight and prescription, and they're using it properly. And the fact is that a bunch of these drugs represent huge, huge breakthroughs in brain research. And they are, when they're needed and they work, they're like miracles out of the Bible. Why wouldn't we? It'd be a dark ages stupidity to turn our backs on them when they're there and they can be useful and productive. However, we also know that there are Adderall gangs in college dorms. We know that kids are dumping the stuff out of the capsules and snorting it before tests. We know that somewhere out on the fringe of Adderall, you're going to have abuse. And the same thing is true of EPO and the performance-enhancing drugs. EPO, in particular, was invented to treat cancer patients. And, interesting that Mr. Armstrong has been through cancer himself, is so familiar with it, and knew how to get it dosed and administered and hidden and so on. It helps people who, it boosts red cell production for people who don't have enough red cells because their immune systems are screwed up. Mr. Armstrong is on the fringe. What I'm saying is, EPO itself isn't bad. Adderall itself isn't bad. These things in and of themselves represent enormous breakthroughs in research and are huge assets there to make our health better, make us live longer and be stronger. But on the fringe, you have people who abuse them for this reason or that. And that's what Armstrong is. He's an abuser. He's an abuser. He's an abuser who sticks stuff in his arm to make himself something that he isn't. I got a bunch of comments from people who said, well, he only won by a few seconds, and how can you say that's just the drug? That's not true. The Tour de France isn't won by a few seconds. It's won by 15, 20 minutes. And it's in having this chemical advantage could be the absolute deciding factor. The other thing is the commenters who said, well, they all do it. Well, what kind of argument is that? I mean, that's what your kid says when he gets caught pinching candy bars at the 7-Eleven. Well, all my friends steal candy bars. At least I don't steal beer. That just doesn't work. 'Cause, there has to be a moral red line somewhere, and that red line winds up being expressed as rules. We got to have rules, right? I mean, we have the 10 big ones. Not supposed to kill people, stuff like that. I don't want to get all biblical on us. I'm not a very biblical person, but at some point in life there are rules, and then you have people who break those rules, and they are called cheaters. I sort of don't get the emotional intensity of the defense of Armstrong. That gets into my argument about the Nazis. I guess in the next segment, I wasn't going to bring that up, but in the next segment of the show, we may get there. What is it about Lance Armstrong that makes people say, well, we don't care if he cheated. We don't care if he sticks stuff in his arm. We don't care if he's an example to our kids that you have to stick stuff in your arm. And by the way, I'm not a huge fan of the example to our kids argument. You need to teach your kids not to fashion their lives on sports heroes, rock and roll heroes, people they see on TV. I don't think Lance Armstrong gets up every morning and thinks, what can I do today to be an example to kids? And I don't hold him responsible exactly for doing that, but what is it about him in particular where he is such a manifestly bad example, and he's such a manifest hypocrite and such a manifest cheater, and I would say loser? Look, the guy just lost 7 Tour de France titles, lost them. What kind of loser is that? I think if you were going to draw up a list of the world's greatest losers, you'd have to include Lance Armstrong. Lost 7 Tour de France titles in one fell swoop. That's a bunch of losing all at once. What is it about a guy like this who can be that big a loser, that big a cheat, and people nevertheless just rabidly defend him and will come up with any kind of argument to defend him? I think that goes to our worship of heroes, and the notion that life is all about either worshiping these people or trying to become one of them instead of just being yourself. We'll get back into that. This is Jim Schutze. Get off my lawn. See you in a minute.
This is Jim Rowe of Monday's Cajun Zydeco Music Party. Come join me this Saturday, October 27th, for the second annual KNON Zydeco Halloween Fey Voodoo Party, starring the fabulous Rosie Ledette for one night only. That's right, Rosie Ledette is coming back with a new CD this Saturday, October 27th. Opening the show will be JV and the Zydeco Posse. Doors will be at 7. The Alligator Cafe will be serving up a deliciously devilish dinner including Cajun pasta Orleans, shrimp etouffee, red beans and rice, and bread pudding for dessert. And of course there will be a costume contest for the scariest, funniest, and most Mardi Gras costumes. Just added, Zydeco dance lessons before JB and the Zydeco Posse by Cowboy. Tickets are available now at KNON.org, Forever Young Records, and Bill's Records in Dallas. That's the second annual Zydeco Halloween Fey Voodoo starring Rosie Ledette and JB and the Zydeco Posse this Saturday, October 27th at Poor David's Pub, located at 1313 South Lamar in Dallas, for a night of frighteningly fantastic fun.
Tune in every Saturday morning for KNON Speak Up Saturdays. Speak Up Saturday starts at 7 a.m. with an expanded church information and forum hosted by Reverend Marion Barnett, a news and politics show for you. Then at 9 a.m., it's the Workers' Beat hosted by Gene Lance, sponsored by the CWA, a show for workers' rights. At 10 a.m., the Dallas Observer presents Jim Schutze, Get Off My Lawn with the other side of the news. Wrapping up Speak Up Saturdays at 11 a.m. is Lambda Weekly with David Taffet, the longest-running LGBTQ talk show in the country. Be sure to tune in every Saturday morning to Speak Up Saturdays right here on KNON 89.3 FM, the voice of the people.
It's a brand new morning on KNON with an all-new music format, heard from 7 to 8 a.m. Check it out on your drive to work and get your day started with music. Monday morning features Ranger Rita and the Magic Time Warp, playing music from 1947 to 1962. Tuesdays, it's Everybody's Folk with Ginny Peel at 7 a.m. and the Celtic Music Show at 8 a.m. with Brad Madison. Our all-new format, the KNON Blend, featuring music from all our KNON shows, is heard Wednesday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Wednesday has Pippin. Thursday, it's Dave Chaos and Bridget Kicks. And Fridays features Christian and Jennifer. More information is at KNON.org. Tune in to the all-new KNON Morning Blend every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas. KNON is the voice of the people, Dallas's most diverse radio station.
Lou Lisa's annual Thanksgiving live broadcast will be happening on Thursday, November 22nd from 9 a.m. till noon, and you're invited. Join Lisa and special guest Reverend K.M. Williams, KNON's own Greg A. Smith and J. Mack, and Jackie Donlow for the live broadcast and Thanksgiving breakfast from the Alligator Cafe. It's happening at the KNON Studios, located at 5353 Maple Avenue at Butler in Dallas, and seating is very limited, so get your tickets now at KNON.org. Come join Blue Lisa, Reverend K.M. Williams, Greg A. Smith, J. Mack, and Jackie Donlow for this great Thanksgiving tradition on Thursday, November 22nd from 9 a.m. till noon for the live broadcast. This is a KNON benefit event.
Jim Schutze, back with Get Off My Lawn. We've been talking about Lance Armstrong and some stuff I wrote last week for the version of Get Off My Lawn that runs on the Dallas Observer webpage. A little bit about a column I've written for next week for the newspaper, as we call it. That's the one that's on paper, you know, it's in a box. For our younger readers, you actually pick this thing up and hold it in your hand and read it. And it's very high-tech. When you're done with it, you can throw it in a trash can. You can't do that with your iPad, right? So we've developed this thing called paper that's very, very sophisticated, and you don't have to carry it around. And if you remember something that you wanted to read and you didn't, you just go to another box and pick up a new. It's so cool. You will not believe it. But anyway, I have a column in next week's paper about Lance Armstrong also. And so I decided to go ahead and tell you about my theory about how Lance Armstrong's connected to the Nazis. When I filed this column, I was surprised that my editor, Patrick Williams, didn't raise more objections to it. Patrick's kind of hard on me sometimes. And, he made a few small changes, but he kind of waved it through. And I said, Patrick, I'm really surprised that I got away with this, the thing about Lance Armstrong and the Nazis, and you didn't have more to say about it. And he said, well, Jim, other than shooting you in the neck with a Thorazine dart, He said, I couldn't really think of anything, any way to improve it or change it. So I guess what he meant was that he thought my point was a little out there, and maybe it is. In this column I've written for next week, I go back to a 1975 piece by the writer, the late Susan Sontag. Brilliant writer. She was writing about a woman named Leni Riefenstahl, who was a German filmmaker in the 30s. At the time that Sontag wrote about her, Riefenstahl was still alive. In fact, she just died in 2003. And at the time Sontag wrote about her in the 70s, Riefenstahl was enjoying a kind of a rebirth, a reconstruction. People were saying, oh, she wasn't really a Nazi, she was just a brilliant filmmaker, and she had to do a couple of those movies for Hitler, but that shouldn't mask her genius. And Riefenstahl herself was pushing this rebirth of herself, and mainly what Sontag was doing was knocking that all to pieces, and she just had evidence after evidence after evidence that Riefenstahl had been an enthusiastic Nazi propagandist. That wasn't the thing that interested me most about Sontag's essay. What interested me most was the thing that had bothered me since I was a little kid about Nazi movies. Why did the Nazis always have the cooler uniforms? And was it true that they did? I mean, it seemed like they were so much more, I don't know, kind of kinky, fashionable, with the high boots and all the, the lightning bolts and the skulls and stuff. They're almost like Halloween costumes. And I wondered if that was just Hollywood. Sontag said, no, absolutely not. That the Nazis had a great sense of aesthetics, and that in fact that's sort of that's part of how it worked. And in our revulsion from the consequences of German National Socialism and our hatred of the Nazis for moral reasons, we've blinded ourselves to the fact that they were pretty chic. They had she compares the Nazi uniforms to G.I. Joe uniforms, and she says ours are just absolutely frumpy. She said the thing about the Nazi uniforms was that they had that little edge of eccentricity that made them cool, kind of cool. Not too much, just enough. And that in fact the way not just Nazism, but fascism works, is that it sets up these great unitary ideals. This is what everything should look like. This is what everybody should be. And in it, there's this enormous cult of the hero. This is what you want to do. You want to be the hero, or you want to live in service to the hero. You either are the hero, which lots of luck. How many people get that job? So mainly what you want to do is sort of just spend your life sucking up to the hero, worshiping the hero, wishing you could be more like the hero, and so on. How do I get to Lance Armstrong? Well, I want to go, I'm not going to read them to you again, but I was really struck by the tone of the comments that I got when I attacked Lance Armstrong online last week. Let me interrupt myself here. If you want to call in and stop me, please, 972-647-1893, 972-647-1893, and I welcome your comments. But what struck me about the angry comments that I got last week when I attacked Lance Armstrong was the tone that, come on, this guy's a hero. Look at what he did. Look at his accomplishments. Look at his role as brought to us by the media and brought to us by him. Look at this carefully defined image, this handsome, cool guy who fought his way back from cancer and won all these Tour de France and other titles, First, and there's a lot of suggestion that, well, the Frenchies are just mad, the Europeans are mad because an American got over there and started winning it, and so on and so forth. But mainly there was this notion that it was wrong to criticize him because he's a hero. And I don't want to, excuse me, I don't want to get all red state, blue state ideological about it, but I have to tell you that in the most strident criticism, I picked up a distinctly kind of conservative tone, that you just don't like Armstrong because you're a libtard, and you don't understand the heroic character, and you don't understand the individual and the guy who fights to overcome all odds no matter what. Let me remind you, no matter what in this case involves sticking a needle in your arm to do it, cheating, and that's somehow okay. That we should I don't know, wink at that or embrace it because it's what it takes to be a hero. Before I launched on this column for next week, just to sort of catch myself up on performance-enhancing drugs, I watched this great PBS special, from some years ago about the East German women's swimming teams in the 70s and 80s. This is when testosterone was just showing up as an enhancement drug. And the East German regime was taking these little girls, absolutely without their knowledge, without their parents' knowledge, hiding it from the parents, and shooting them full of testosterone. And the results were just tragic on the lives of these women. It showed the willingness of a regime to just trample individual rights, to show utter disregard for the soul itself in order to achieve this public heroic status that was so important to the East German regime. They were going to show what great jocks they were, what great athletes they were, what great swimmers they were. I think that it's by no means coincidental that this idea shows up in totalitarian regimes, that the hero, the so-called individual, actually is the mechanism by which individualism itself is extinguished, because every individual is supposed to prostrate himself or herself before this graven idol of heroic perfection. And to me, that's what Armstrong represents. And that's what the defense of him represents. I can see really getting into bicycling just like people get into curling or other bizarre, to me, sports that where there's a big learning curve. I confess I never quite got bicycling. I don't know why. Why do I like baseball? I don't like bicycling. It doesn't make any sense. It's all personal taste. I can see really getting into bicycling. I can see being absolutely thrilled to see the Americans surge ahead in this sport that's always been dominated by Europeans. That's all fun. That's cool. I can see being moved by the story that you're told is Armstrong's story. The cancer, the overcoming, all of that. But when reality rears its sometimes ugly head, when reality shows up and says, look, that's all a lie, here's what the guy really did, then it seems to me you got to give it up. And the willingness to say, or the tendency to say, no, we're not going to give it up. We're going to stick with the hero story, and we don't care what he did, and we don't care what it means for our kids or individuals. What counts is the hero. To me, that's the essence of Nazism. And in this case, it's just projected and purveyed and disseminated by free market advertising and media and so on, but you wind up in the same place where you just give up on the soul in deference to the public hero. We got Randy on the line. Randy, how are you today?
Good morning, Jim. How you doing?
I'm sneaking by.
All right, that's my next favorite saying. Hey, it's funny how we as the public want to hold these so-called heroes, which are sports, personalities like Souza, like Lance, like the baseball issue with the doping, and getting involved with extramarital things like Kobe Bryant's thing. And we want to nail these individuals to the cross, even try to prosecute them criminally for something they did to themselves. But in the same instance, when we find out that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction, but our whole Congress and Senate and President sent us to war, there's no recourse. When we find out that the banking industry was pulling all these slick deals where people are on the street now and have lost their home and their lives in the war, and we know they did wrong, we don't want to nail those individuals to the cross. Where is the twistedness of that?
Well, and you bring up a very interesting point and a larger point about lying, in that we live in this era when the lies are so huge, so titanic, that they mess with people's sense of reality. I think I spend a lot of time talking to sort of radical anarchist 20s types whose worldview is that it's all a lie, that there's no difference between Romney and Obama, that this whole thing is a scam. And much as I hate that idea because of it makes us 60s people look like a Sunday school picnic in terms of cynicism, but then they keep turning out to be right, and that's what I hate worse. So I think you raise a very important issue, that lying and unreality and just lying to people's faces. There was a story early on in the presidential election season that said that both campaigns have figured out that fact-checking, who cares? That it's not a big negative to get caught lying. Just get the message out.
Well, you know why they do that, Jim? It's because we got about a 10-day memory. They knew we weren't going to remember that issue in 10 days from when it was stated.
Yeah. And you hear this criticism of people a lot on both sides. People will say, well, people just make up their own facts. They make up their own reality. They don't care what's true. I don't know. In that, I hear, wait a minute, that means people can't figure out what's true. And they can't figure out what's true because the great authorities and the great voices that are supposed to tell them what's true have been telling these stupendous lies for a decade or more. I guess it goes back a little farther than that, eh? Hey, Randy, good to hear from you.
Right,
we'll
bye-bye.
see you. Jim Schutze, get off my lawn. 972-647-1893. It's 972-647-1893. Randy, as usual, took me off into the metaphysical there, and we need to maybe rein it back a little and remember that we're talking about Lance Armstrong, and we'll be back after the break.
Darklings, it's me, the diva of the dead of the Necrotones, here to tell you that Blue Lisa is celebrating the 13th anniversary of her show, Big Texas Blues, with a Halloween spectacular starring the Necrotones in our first reunion show. Now, almost a decade on All Hallows Eve, Wednesday, October 31st. The swing and ghoul jazz and stage show of the Necrotones has always been frighteningly good fun, and we've decided to bring it back from the grave for one night only as per request of Blue Lisa herself. She has such fantastic taste. Also appearing on the bill will be Howling K. Smith at 9 p.m., channeling the music and spirit of Screamin' Jay Hawkins. There'll be a costume contest for scariest, most cocktail, and funniest costumes, so start planning now. The place for the musical haunting is LaGrange, located at 2704 Elm Street in Deep Ellum. The doors are at 8 p.m., with Count Rockula providing spooky visuals and music to die for. Tickets are available now at KNON.org, Bill's Records and Good Records in Dallas, and Forever Young Records in Grand Prairie. That's Blue Lisa's Lucky 13th Anniversary Extravaganza, starring the Necrotones, with special spooky guest Howlin' K. Smith on Halloween night, Wednesday, October 31st. It's going to be a scream.
Tune in every Saturday morning for KNON Speak Up Saturdays. Speak Up Saturday starts at 7 a.m. with an expanded church information and forum hosted by Reverend Marion Barnett, a news and politics show for you. Then at 9 a.m., it's the Workers' Beat hosted by Gene Lance, sponsored by the CWA, a show for workers' rights. At 10 a.m., the Dallas Observer presents Jim Schutze, Get Off My Lawn with the Other Side of the News. Wrapping up Speak Up Saturdays at 11 a.m. is Lambda Weekly with David Taffet, the longest-running LGBTQ talk show in the country. Be sure to tune in every Saturday morning to Speak Up Saturdays right here on KNON 89.3 FM, the voice of the people.
Want to hear some great Texas blues? KNON has the CD for you. KNON's Texas Blues Radio Volume 5, our latest blues compilation CD to benefit community radio, sponsored by Forever Young Records. This CD features 15 tracks and 60 minutes of great original Dallas-Fort Worth blues from Tutu Jones, Blues Boy Bo, Buddy Whittington, Andrea Dawson, Kirkland James, Sonny Colley, Johnny Red and the Roosters, the Chris Watson Band, the Two-Tones, the Rough Cut Blues Band, Jeff Stone and Charlie Love, Dave Millsap, Sirloin and the Ash-Kicking Machine, Michael J. and the Paul Bird Band, and JJ and the Detonators. We're only selling 1,000 copies, and it will never be reissued. Get your copy now at Forever Young Records in Grand Prairie, Recordtown in Fort Worth, and in Dallas at Bill's Records and Rewind Music. The CD is available as an MP3 download at KNON.org. All proceeds benefit community radio, KNON. For more info on Texas Blues Radio Volume 5, visit us at KNON.org. Get your copy now and hear some real Texas blues. Your ears will thank you for it.
Hey, babes, I take one now.
Jim Schutze, back with Get Off My Lawn. Before I forget, I want to say thank you again to David Taffet for sitting in for me last week. David Taffet, host of Lambda Weekly, the nation's oldest LGBTQ radio program, did a great job, and he's going to follow me here in about 15 minutes. But he took over for me last week when I was down camping around Caddo Lake. So thank you, David, for your help. We've been talking about Lance Armstrong and blood doping and the morality and politics of heroes, which I've discussed in the online version of Get Off My Lawn, the Dallas Observer online page, and I'm going to talk about again next week in the newspaper. And before I start running my mouth about it again, we've got Jay here on the phone. Jay, how are you this morning?
How you doing today,
Good.
Jim?
Is this?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
About this thing with Lance Armstrong.
Yes, sir.
I believe it can all be traced back to the educational system about the way we relate to new knowledge, the way we are taught to relate to new knowledge. That nobody wants to accept anything other than the company line.
Right.
You see? And they're afraid of it, and they'll fight you tooth and nail if you try to bring in something new. And so that's my take on it. Everybody's just afraid of it because it's new. It could become accepted and
Jay,
become the company line.
We're not headed toward Obama, are we? Or were you? Did you have something to say about Obama?
No, I'm talking about Lance Armstrong.
I'm sorry. I had you mixed up with another caller.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, but that's.
Tell me what you mean. What do you mean that we won't accept anything new?
We don't want to. We will eventually after it becomes the company line. You see, after it becomes the established perception about the matter.
With Armstrong, what is it that we won't accept? Or I'm sorry. I'm not
people are saying, are telling you that you have to believe that he's a hero.
Oh.
That it's okay for him to be a dopehead.
Yeah.
Because he's the number one representative of the U.S. in France. And all that kind of mess. And so they just don't want to believe anything other than that.
No, so, I think you're exactly right. In fact, there's an argument coming up in the background that all the performance-enhancing drugs should be legalized. Just take the gloves off. Let people use whatever they want. And I talked to a guy, there's a guy in Houston named Dr. James Muntz. He's the team doctor to the Astros and the Rockets, but he's a big expert, too, on high school kids and performance-enhancing drugs in sports. And he just came back from a big conference in Washington, and he said that they figure 8% of the kids in high school sports use drugs to perform better. 8%. Yeah, it's not 90%. That's good, but 8%'s a lot, and it's probably gets to be what the other people say is but it's the 8% who are the first stringers. It's the ones who are at the most competitive level. And there are other people who say, look, if you don't want your kid to take dope to do better in sports, take steroids or whatever, don't let him be in sports. Don't let him do competitive sports, because if he does competitive sports or she does competitive sports, they're going to get to a point where they have to do this stuff to compete. So then I think you're right. Then you get this company line behind it. Well, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it can all be traced back to the way we are taught in our educational system. And I got to go, Jim, because I got to go check in at the company. I'll see you later.
Jay, thank you. I made a mistake. I took Jay for another regular caller, and it was my error. Sorry. And he raised a very interesting point that we have a tendency to sort of let this new consensus, the new company line, creep up on us until we accept it, and we don't stop and think about the consequences. As I was saying when I was talking to Jay, there are consequences here. This stuff doesn't stop at professional sports. It leaks down through all competitive sports, and we have made this religion of sports. As if competing in sports and succeeding in sports is the most important thing in life. There's a whole quality to that mentality that tends to take us off the deep end. I talked to another guy, Professor Quinn at the University of North Texas. I'm not remembering Professor Quinn's first name, I'm sorry, but he is head of the addiction program at UNT. The addiction program, excuse me, is both research and therapy for kids. And he was interesting. He talks about how in sport, among really, really hyper-competitive people, you have a huge amount of just brain chemicals knocking around. And you have this incredible high that they feel in competition. It's not unakin to the high that rock stars feel, performers feel on stage. I'm sure you've heard rock stars say stuff like, oh, you can't imagine what it's like to be out on that stage in front of that huge audience. It's such a high that when you come off stage, you don't want to come down. So you don't. And what Quinn was saying was that life can offer a number of highs like that that people don't want to come down from. And, so you get into a tricky business. So should you not perform? Should you not compete? Should you not get high on life? Because then you might get high on drugs. That's crazy. But you can also start blurring the line. Randy brought up a point that I wanted to come back to before we get to the end of this. He was talking about how we tend to scour sports heroes for all kinds of things. For example, their love lives. What if they're not faithful to their spouses and so on? I hate that stuff too. They're baseball players, they're track stars, they're football players. I don't think we should care what they do with their personal lives. Of course, I don't think we should care too much what politicians do with their personal lives. I don't even want to know. I remember I had a boss once when I served on a newspaper editorial board, and whenever anybody would sit down and say, now there are a few things I want to tell you about myself, and you could tell they were going to go into some big personal confessional, she would put her hand up and say, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I must insist on my right not to know." And I feel that way about a lot of the pawing through people's personal lives. About the time we're dependent on Hollywood or sports to give us our morals, we're pretty well done for anyway. Hollywood sells tickets. Some people argue they don't sell tickets; they sell popcorn and $5 soda drinks. But they're not in the business of providing us with our morals. Sports figures aren't in the business of providing us with our morals. They're in the business of sports and winning, and we have to keep that in mind. And you can go too far in trying to hold up sports figures and criticize them for their moral failings. I mean, that's really just another version of this whole thing I've been talking about, which is hero worship. Don't worship heroes that much. Don't expect that much of them. They all have feet of clay. They're all just people. People tend to be. Some people are really good at specific things, but it doesn't mean that they're born with some kind of intrinsically superior character or quality. We're all made of pretty much the same stuff. And in going after Lance Armstrong, I do remind myself of that. The guy's just a bike rider. Come on. But the point is, he's a cheater. He's a cheater, and he won't admit it. And that whole sport is full of cheating. And you don't know who's the best bike rider. You don't know who's trained the hardest because they're doing these drugs. And so am I looking at the bike rider, or am I looking at the last needle that got stuck in the bike rider's arm? To me, that's not sport. That's some kind of sick pharmacology. And the rest of them, the vast majority of them, have fessed up to it. You also get, and I noticed this in some of the comments, the angriest comments that I got in the online version of Get Off My Lawn last week on the Dallas Observer webpage. Some of the people who were defending Armstrong were painting the bike riders who have confessed as the rats. They're the ones who ratted him out. And he's the hero because of omerta, because of the rule of silence. He never broke. He's like the hero gangster. And what I'm saying is, it is a form of gangsterism. That's what it is. And if you're telling me that we want to put this in front of kids, the nation, the future, and say, this is what America's all about: gangsterism, lying, cheating, and sticking needles in your arm. I don't believe that. I don't believe that we want that. I just think there has to be something better. I also want to. I need to go back because I mentioned Dr. Jim Schutze in Houston a while ago, and the fact that he was talking about the incidence of this stuff among high school kids. He says he does not think it's epidemic. He thinks that a majority of the stuff that they use that qualifies as performance-enhancing drugs, we're not talking, in high school kids, we're not talking about kids sticking steroids in their arms. We're talking maybe about pills, pill-form steroids, but he thinks not a lot of that. He thinks that we're talking more about these super caffeine boost drinks, which are performance-enhancing. Some kids take asthma medicine to perform better in sports. He says he thinks the majority of it is not especially physically deleterious in terms of long-term effects. And that would go probably to the argument that the picture of an epidemic of high school kids using performance-enhancing drugs is media BS, of which I am aware there's a lot in this world. There is a tendency that we have in the media to invent epidemics, and somehow they melt away. We give up killer bees because, oh, look, we got SARS. That's an even better one. And I don't mean, I'm not preaching hysteria about performance-enhancing drugs in kids. I don't think the real-life picture from what I was able to learn from reading and interviewing people merits hysteria. And to the extent that there's a problem, it's one that we can pull back. It's one that we can address. It's one that's fixable. But it's one we want to think about, and we do have to fix, and we do need to think about the moral example that we present to kids. And if you tell the kid life is all about being that hero, see that guy on TV? The most important thing in your life is to be that guy on TV. And if you have to die doing it, it's worth it. You don't want to tell a kid that. You don't want to tell a kid that life is about being a hero. The real hero is the kid who puts together a decent, okay life for himself or herself and keeps a roof over the head and lives up to some obligations. Man, that's hard work. At any rate, it's not about being Lance Armstrong, I hope. I hope that's not the meaning and purpose of all of our existences. Lance Armstrong worship. I hope we're not going to wind up with, one of the callers said that these things sort of overtake us slowly and we begin to agree to it. I hope I don't come back as a time traveler 100 years from now and they've got all these altars around with images of Lance Armstrong with needles sticking out of his arm and people bowing down and worshiping our great national hero. I suppose that's probably not what we're looking at. This is a topic I'm going to take up again next week in the newspaper version of the Dallas Observer. That's the one that's on paper, and we print it, and it's in boxes, and you can go pick it up on the street. We've also been discussing it online a lot in Get Off My Lawn. On the Dallas Observer webpage, Get Off My Lawn is the column and the show on KNON, where we try to talk about stuff that people just shouldn't talk about. And so today's version has been why I hate Lance Armstrong. I did start out, I was honest with you. I told you that when I published my thing online saying that I hated Lance Armstrong, I got a ton of comments saying, Jim, we hate you. And that's what you deserve when you use that four-letter word. We'll see you next week. This is Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn, urging you to look for me on the Dallas Observer webpage. Look for me in those little boxes on the street. And look for me here again next Saturday, 10 a.m., Jim Schutze, Get Off My Lawn. We'll see you then. Bye.
You're listening to KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas, the voice of the people, voted best radio station for music 2 years in a row by the Dallas Observer.
Did you know that KNON podcasts all of its local talk shows? KNON has local talk, each show covering your community in its own unique way. So if you missed one of our great morning talk shows, you can go back and listen to it online. We keep the shows for 2 months so you can hear everything you have been missing out on. Visit KNON.org for more information about the KNON Morning Talk Shows podcast, also available on iTunes.